Steve Jobs opens by saying he will tell only 3 stories from his life. The first starts with dropping out of Reed College. He explains that once he stopped following required classes, he began following curiosity instead. One class grabbed him completely: calligraphy. He learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, spacing, and why beautiful typography mattered. At the time, he says, it seemed useless. But about 10 years later, while designing the first Macintosh, those lessons became part of the computer's typography system. Jobs even jokes that because Windows copied the Mac, personal computers may never have had multiple typefaces without that random class. That story becomes the hook for the whole speech. Jobs argues that you cannot connect the dots looking forward, only backward. The challenge is trusting that experiences that seem disconnected now may become valuable later. Jobs keeps returning to 3 questions that still resonate far beyond a graduation speech. First, how do you handle uncertainty when your path stops making sense? He describes sleeping on friends' floors, collecting Coke bottles for food money, and walking across town for free meals at the Hare Krishna temple after dropping out. Those experiences sounded unstable, but they gave him room to explore interests that later shaped the Macintosh. Second, what happens after a public failure? Jobs says being fired from Apple devastated him because he had built the company from a garage into a major business. Yet losing that position eventually pushed him into another creative chapter. Third, why think so much about death? Jobs argues that remembering mortality cuts through fear, pride, and outside expectations. Across all 3 stories, the common theme is learning to make decisions without certainty. The second story begins with Apple's rise. Jobs and Steve Wozniak started the company in a garage, and within 10 years Apple had grown into a multi-billion-dollar company with thousands of employees. Then, at age 30, Jobs was fired from the company he started. He describes the experience as crushing and deeply public. He felt he had let down a generation of entrepreneurs and even considered leaving Silicon Valley. But after months of uncertainty, one realization stayed constant. He still loved building things. That mattered because it pushed him to start over instead of retreating. Over the next 5 years, he founded NeXT, started Pixar, and later returned to Apple after Apple acquired NeXT. Jobs says being fired removed the heaviness of success and replaced it with the freedom of being a beginner again. He does not pretend failure feels inspiring in the moment. He calls it awful-tasting medicine. But he argues that loving the work itself gives people endurance when titles, status, or plans collapse. His advice to graduates is direct. Find work you genuinely love, and if you have not found it yet, keep looking. The final story shifts to death. Jobs says that for years he looked in the mirror each morning and asked, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? If the answer stayed no for too long, he knew something had to change. Then the question became personal. About a year before the speech, doctors discovered a tumor on his pancreas and initially believed the cancer was incurable. He remembers being told he might have only months left and needing to prepare his family. Later, a biopsy showed it was a rare form that could be treated with surgery. Jobs says the experience clarified priorities. Remembering death stripped away fear of embarrassment, pride, and the illusion that there was something to lose. He tells the graduates that they are already naked, so there is little reason not to follow their hearts. He closes with a line from the Whole Earth catalog: "Stay hungry, stay foolish." What gives this speech staying power is how practical the stories are. A dropped class influences the Macintosh. Getting fired leads to NeXT and Pixar. A cancer diagnosis becomes a filter for decision-making. Jobs never claims life is predictable. His point is that curiosity often matters before certainty arrives. The speech also resists easy success cliches. Failure hurts. Risk feels unclear. Important choices usually arrive before proof does. But Jobs argues that trusting your interests, continuing after setbacks, and remembering time is limited can keep people from drifting into work or lives that feel empty. The final challenge hanging over the speech is simple. Where are you settling because fear feels safer than honesty? And what would change if you trusted your own curiosity a little more?